Some things are lost for a reason, but sometimes they are lost because someone is waiting to find them. Caleb Rowe never expected a quiet afternoon walk with Atlas to uncover a memory that had been forgotten for years. The neighborhood was peaceful, the kind of place where the sound of wind moving through the trees mixed with distant voices and the soft rhythm of everyday life. Caleb walked along the familiar path with Atlas beside him, the German shepherd moving calmly through the afternoon light. Atlas had always been curious, but that day felt different. Near a small community park, the dog suddenly slowed down. His ears lifted, his eyes focused on something near an old wooden bench. Caleb noticed and followed his gaze. There, partially hidden beneath fallen leaves, was a worn lunchbox. It was nothing special at first glance. The paint was faded. The edges showed years of use. It looked like something someone had forgotten and never returned for. "Atlas, come on," Caleb said gently. But the German shepherd stayed where he was. He approached the lunchbox carefully and sat beside it. He did not scratch it. He did not try to open it. He simply stayed. Caleb had seen Atlas react to many things before, but this was different. The dog looked at the old lunchbox as if it carried a meaning Caleb could not understand. Curiosity grew in his mind. He picked up the lunchbox and noticed something unusual. A small name label was attached inside the handle, worn but still visible. It was not a name Caleb recognized. The discovery made him pause. Why would Atlas care about an old lunchbox? Why this one? Why here? Caleb carried it home, but Atlas continued looking back toward the park during their walk. That evening, the lunchbox sat on the kitchen table while Caleb and Atlas rested nearby. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of the house settling. Caleb looked at the faded object again. He wondered about the person who once carried it. Someone had packed meals inside it. Someone had held it during ordinary days. Someone had probably considered it just another part of life. Yet somehow, years later, Atlas had found it and refused to leave it behind. The next morning, Caleb decided to look closer. Inside the lunchbox, beneath an old layer of dust, he discovered something that made him stop. There was a small photograph folded carefully inside. The picture showed a family standing together, smiling during a moment that clearly meant something to them. Caleb studied the faces, searching for a connection. He did not know their story yet. He did not know why this lunchbox had been forgotten or why Atlas had been drawn to it. But he felt certain of one thing. This was not just an old object. It was a piece of someone's life that had been waiting to be found. Atlas rested beside him, watching quietly. The German shepherd had discovered something hidden, but Caleb was beginning to understand that maybe the real mystery was not what was inside the lunchbox. The real mystery was who had been missing from the story all these years. The old lunchbox remained on Caleb Rowe's kitchen table the next morning, quietly waiting beneath the morning sunlight coming through the window. It was just a simple object, but Caleb could not ignore the feeling that there was a story hidden inside it. Atlas sat nearby, watching with the same calm attention he had shown the day before. The German shepherd had never been interested in random things for no reason. Caleb had learned that over the years. Atlas noticed small details. A change in someone's mood. A person who needed kindness. A moment that others might overlook. But this time, it was a forgotten lunchbox holding his attention. Caleb carefully examined the photograph he had found inside. The picture showed a family standing together outside what looked like an older family home. Their smiles were natural, the kind that came from a moment when people felt completely connected. On the back of the photograph, there was a handwritten note. The words were faded, but a few details were still clear. There was a date from many years earlier and a short message written with care. Caleb read it slowly, trying to understand why this small piece of the past had crossed his path. He looked at Atlas. "You knew there was something here, didn't you?" he said softly. Atlas simply looked back, his tail moving gently against the floor. Later that afternoon, Caleb returned to the park with Atlas. He carried the lunchbox carefully, hoping to find some clue about where it came from. The park was peaceful, with families walking along the paths and children playing nearby. Caleb looked around and noticed an older community board near the entrance. It contained announcements, local memories, and old photographs from the neighborhood. As he stepped closer, something caught his attention. One of the pictures looked familiar. It was a photo of the same family from the lunchbox. Caleb felt a quiet surprise. The family had once been part of this community. They had shared ordinary days here, just like everyone else. But something had happened over time. The name connected to the lunchbox was no longer familiar to the people nearby. Caleb asked a few residents if they recognized the name. Some shook their heads. Others paused and searched their memories. One person mentioned that the family had moved away many years ago, but nobody knew where they went or what happened afterward. The mystery became deeper. That evening, Caleb sat outside with Atlas while the sun lowered behind the trees. The lunchbox rested beside him. He thought about how many objects carried stories that nobody ever asked about. A forgotten jacket, an old photograph, a handwritten note. Each one belonged to someone's life. Atlas placed his head gently near the lunchbox, almost as if reminding Caleb that they were not finished searching. Caleb smiled. He did not know what secret the lunchbox held yet. He did not know whose life was connected to it. But he knew Atlas had led him here for a reason. The next step was finding the person behind the name. And somewhere, hidden among years of memories, there was a family story waiting to be brought back into the light. The mystery of the old lunchbox stayed on Caleb Rowe's mind as the days passed. What started as a simple discovery in a quiet park had slowly become something much deeper. Every time Caleb looked at the faded photograph inside, he wondered about the family behind those smiles. Who were they? Why had this memory been left behind? And why had Atlas been the one to find it? The German Shepherd seemed just as interested as before. Whenever Caleb placed the lunchbox on the table, Atlas would sit nearby and watch quietly. There was no excitement or urgency in his behavior, only patience. It was almost as if Atlas understood that some stories needed time before they could be uncovered. Caleb decided to visit the local community center. He thought maybe someone there would recognize the family from the photograph. The small building was filled with old records, neighborhood memories, and pictures collected over many years. An employee named Margaret looked carefully at the photograph when Caleb showed it to her. For a moment, her expression changed. "I have seen this family before," she said softly. Caleb leaned closer, surprised. Margaret explained that the family had been well known in the neighborhood many years ago. They were known for helping others, bringing people together, and creating memories that many residents still remembered. But over time, life changed. People moved away. Connections faded. Some stories became forgotten simply because nobody remained to tell them. Margaret searched through old files and found a small note connected to the family name. It mentioned a house nearby where the family had once lived. Caleb thanked her and carefully placed the lunchbox back into his bag. Outside the community center, Atlas waited patiently beside him. Caleb looked at the German Shepherd and smiled. "You really wanted me to find this, didn't you?" The dog looked ahead as if the answer had always been clear. That afternoon, Caleb followed the address from the old note. He and Atlas walked through a quiet neighborhood filled with mature trees and older homes. The streets felt peaceful, carrying the feeling of memories that had remained in place even as years passed. When they reached the house, Caleb stopped. It was no longer the same as the one in the photograph, but something about it felt familiar. A small garden remained near the front walkway. The shape of the windows matched the old picture. It was another piece of the story falling into place. Before Caleb could decide what to do next, Atlas moved closer to the front gate. The German Shepherd paused and looked toward the house with a gentle curiosity. Caleb followed his gaze and noticed something unexpected. A small decoration near the entrance had the same symbol that appeared on the old lunchbox. His heart began to beat faster. This was not just a random discovery anymore. The lunchbox had a connection to this place. Someone here might know why it had been left behind. Caleb stood quietly for a moment, holding the lunchbox in his hands. He realized that every forgotten object carries a question. But sometimes, the answer is not waiting inside the object itself. Sometimes, it is waiting with the people who remember where it came from. Atlas sat beside him, calm and steady. The search was no longer about finding a lost item. It was about finding the story of the people who once held it close. The front gate stood quietly in front of Caleb Rowe, holding years of memories behind it. The small symbol near the entrance matched the one on the old lunchbox, and for a moment, Caleb felt the weight of the discovery. Atlas remained beside him, calm as always, his eyes focused on the house as if he was waiting for the next step. Caleb gently knocked on the door. He did not know who would answer or what story waited inside. After a few moments, the door opened, revealing an older woman with a warm but surprised expression. She looked at Caleb, then at Atlas, and finally at the lunchbox in his hands. Her face changed immediately. "Where did you find that?" she asked softly. Caleb explained everything. He told her about the park, how Atlas stopped beside the lunchbox, and how the photograph inside led them there. The woman listened carefully, holding the edge of the door as old memories began to return. She introduced herself as Emily, a former neighbor of the family in the photograph. She explained that the house once belonged to her closest friends, a family who had created many beautiful memories there. The lunchbox had belonged to their youngest son, a child who carried it every day to school. Emily smiled as she remembered those ordinary mornings. The lunchbox was always placed near the kitchen door, ready for another day. It was not expensive or special to anyone else. It was simply part of their family routine. But sometimes, the smallest objects become the ones that hold the most meaning. Caleb listened as Emily explained that the family eventually moved away after many years. Life changed. New places, new responsibilities, and new paths slowly separated everyone. The lunchbox was one of the many things left behind during that transition. Nobody realized it would become a forgotten piece of their family history. "I always wondered where it went," Emily said quietly. They cared about those memories. Caleb looked down at Atlas. The German shepherd sat peacefully beside him, almost unaware that he had brought an old connection back to life. But Caleb knew better. Atlas had not found just a lunchbox. He had found a doorway to a story that was waiting to be remembered. Emily invited Caleb inside and showed him a few old photographs from the family's time in the neighborhood. As the pages turned, the picture from the lunchbox became clearer. The faces, the house, and the memories all connected together. Caleb noticed something else. Emily had tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. The discovery had not brought sadness. It had brought a feeling of warmth, like finding a familiar song after many years. Before leaving, Caleb asked if the family in the photograph could be found. Emily paused for a moment. She explained that they had moved far away, but she still remembered a few details. There was someone who might know where they were now. Caleb thanked her and carefully carried the lunchbox again. As he walked away with Atlas, he realized the mystery was growing larger. The lunchbox had revealed a forgotten chapter, but there were still missing pages in the story. And somewhere beyond this quiet neighborhood, a family was still waiting to discover that a small piece of their past had finally been found. The search for the family connected to the old lunchbox continued, but Caleb Rowe felt that every step was bringing him closer to a story that had been waiting quietly for years. After meeting Emily, he understood that the object Atlas found was not forgotten because it had lost its value. It was forgotten because life had carried people in different directions. The lunchbox was simply waiting for someone to notice. The next morning, Caleb returned to the community center with Atlas beside him. The German shepherd walked calmly through the doors, almost as if he remembered the place. Emily had given Caleb a small piece of information that might help. She mentioned an old friend who stayed in contact with the family long after they moved away. Her name was Daniel, and he kept many old neighborhood records. Caleb hoped Daniel could provide the missing connection. When they arrived, Daniel looked carefully at the lunchbox. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then he smiled. "I remember this," he said softly. His voice carried the feeling of someone opening a door to the past. Daniel explained that the family from the photograph had once been a big part of the neighborhood. They were the kind of people who remembered birthdays, helped their neighbors, and made everyone feel welcome. The child who carried the lunchbox had grown up surrounded by love and simple traditions. Caleb listened as Daniel described how meaningful those ordinary days were. The lunchbox was never valuable because of what it was made of. It was valuable because it carried moments that could never be replaced. Daniel searched through his records and found an old contact connected to the family. The information was outdated, but there was enough to create a path forward. Caleb looked at Atlas and smiled. The German shepherd had started this journey without knowing where it would lead. He had simply followed a feeling. Later that afternoon, Caleb and Atlas sat outside beneath a quiet sky. The lunchbox rested between them. Caleb thought about how many memories disappear when nobody takes the time to search for them. A family photograph, a handwritten note, a simple container that once held a child's meal. Each small piece carried a story. Atlas rested his head near Caleb's hand, peaceful and patient. Caleb realized that the German shepherd had a unique way of connecting moments together. He did not understand addresses or names. He did not know the details of the past. But he recognized something important. Some things deserve to be found. Over the next few days, Caleb followed the information Daniel provided. The search slowly moved beyond the neighborhood and toward a new possibility. There was a chance the family was still together somewhere, living a life completely unaware that a missing piece of their history had been discovered. One evening, Caleb placed the lunchbox on the table and looked at the old photograph again. The faces in the picture no longer felt like strangers. They felt like people whose story was slowly returning. Atlas walked over and sat beside him. Caleb smiled gently. "You found the first piece," he whispered. The German shepherd looked at him with calm eyes. The journey was not finished yet. The lunchbox had revealed a secret from the past, but the greatest discovery was still waiting. Somewhere ahead, a family was about to learn that something they thought was gone forever had finally found its way home. The search for the family behind the old lunchbox had become more than a simple discovery for Caleb Rowe. What began as a quiet walk with Atlas had turned into a journey through memories, forgotten places, and pieces of a story that many years had hidden away. With the information from Daniel, Caleb finally had a possible direction. The family connected to the photograph had moved several times over the years, but one name kept appearing in the old records. A woman named Sarah had once lived in the same neighborhood and was believed to still be connected to the family. Caleb followed the trail carefully, carrying the lunchbox with him and keeping Atlas close by. The German shepherd seemed peaceful throughout the search, almost as if he knew they were moving closer to the answer. When Caleb finally reached the small town where Sarah was believed to live, he noticed something familiar. The streets had the same quiet feeling as the old neighborhood, the kind of place where memories stayed in the walls and ordinary moments became treasured stories. Caleb and Atlas walked toward a small house surrounded by flowers and a wooden fence. Before Caleb could knock, Atlas stopped near the gate. He looked toward the house with gentle curiosity. Caleb smiled because he recognized that expression. Atlas had found something meaningful again. A few moments later, the door opened. An older woman greeted them with a kind smile. When she saw the lunchbox in Caleb's hands, her expression changed. She placed a hand over her heart and quietly asked where he found it. Caleb explained everything, from the park to the photograph to Atlas refusing to leave the object behind. Sarah listened carefully, and her eyes became filled with emotion. She explained that the lunchbox belonged to her younger brother, the child in the old photograph. It was one of the last things connected to a very special period of their family's life. She remembered how he carried it every morning and how their family shared simple meals together before school and work. Those moments seemed ordinary at the time, but years later, they became some of their most precious memories. Sarah explained that when the family moved, many belongings were packed away or misplaced. The lunchbox disappeared during that time, and everyone assumed it was gone forever. Caleb looked down at Atlas. The German shepherd sat quietly beside him, unaware of how many memories he had helped bring back. Sarah gently touched the lunchbox and smiled. "I never thought I would see this again," she said. Caleb realized that the secret inside the lunchbox was not just about a lost object. It was about a family connection that had been waiting to return. Sarah brought out more old photographs and shared stories about the people in them. Caleb listened as the missing pieces of the past slowly came together. There were moments of laughter, moments of reflection, and memories that had been kept alive through the years. As the afternoon light faded, Caleb understood why Atlas had been drawn to the lunchbox. The dog had not found something valuable because of its appearance. He had found something valuable because of the love attached to it. And now, one forgotten item was bringing a family story back into the light. The morning after meeting Sarah, Caleb Rowe sat quietly at his kitchen table with Atlas resting beside him. The old lunchbox was placed carefully in front of them, no longer looking like a forgotten object from the past. It had become a bridge between memories, a small piece of history that had traveled through years waiting for someone to notice. Caleb thought about how many stories existed around him every day, hidden inside ordinary things that most people never stopped to see. Atlas had a way of finding those moments. The German shepherd did not understand the details of the past, but he seemed to recognize when something mattered. Later that week, Caleb returned to Sarah's home with Atlas. She had invited them back because there was one more part of the story she wanted to share. Inside her house, surrounded by old photographs and family keepsakes, Sarah opened a small wooden box. Inside were letters, handwritten notes, and pictures from years ago. She explained that after her family moved away, many connections slowly became harder to maintain. People changed. Time passed. Everyone continued living their own lives. But the memories remained. She showed Caleb a photograph of her younger brother holding the same lunchbox outside their old home. He was smiling, standing beside family members who looked happy and close. Caleb noticed something special about the picture. It was not a photograph of a perfect moment. It was a photograph of an ordinary moment that became precious because of the love surrounding it. Sarah smiled as she looked at the image. "We never knew those days would become the ones we missed the most," she said. Caleb understood. Sometimes people search for extraordinary moments, but the most meaningful memories are often hidden inside simple days. A shared meal, a walk home, a familiar object carried through childhood. Atlas sat near Sarah as she continued sharing stories. The German shepherd seemed comfortable in the room, as if he belonged there. Sarah laughed softly when she noticed him. "He reminds me of the dogs we had when I was younger," she said. "They always seemed to know when someone needed company." Caleb smiled because he knew exactly what she meant. Atlas had shown that same kindness many times before. He had never needed words. He had only needed a moment to recognize a connection. Over the next few days, Sarah contacted other family members and shared the news about the lunchbox. The response was emotional but peaceful. People were surprised that something so small had returned after so many years. They wanted to see the photograph again. They wanted to hear the story. They wanted to remember. Caleb watched as the lunchbox brought people together, not because it contained something expensive or rare, but because it carried a piece of their shared history. One evening, Caleb walked through the park with Atlas, the same place where the journey began. The bench was still there. The path was still the same. But everything felt different now. A forgotten object had become a reminder that memories are never truly gone when someone cares enough to find them. Atlas walked beside him, calm and steady. Caleb looked at the German shepherd and smiled. The dog had found a lunchbox, but what he really found was a connection waiting to come home. The days after the lunchbox was returned brought a feeling of warmth that Caleb Rowe had not expected. A small object that once sat forgotten beneath leaves had now become a reason for people to reconnect. Caleb watched this change happen quietly, without grand announcements or dramatic moments. It happened through conversations, shared memories, and the simple joy of remembering where people came from. Atlas continued walking beside Caleb, the German shepherd who had started this journey with a single choice to stop and pay attention. One afternoon, Caleb visited Sarah again with Atlas. This time, several members of her family were there. They gathered around a table filled with old photographs, handwritten notes, and memories that had been stored away for years. The lunchbox rested in the center, no longer a lost item, but a treasured reminder of their family story. Sarah's family members took turns holding it, each person remembering something different. One person remembered the smell of homemade meals packed inside it. Another remembered mornings filled with laughter before everyone left for the day. They were not just remembering the lunchbox. They were remembering the people they were when it was still part of their daily lives. Caleb sat quietly and listened. He realized that the true secret hidden inside the lunchbox was not one single event. It was the collection of small moments that had shaped a family. Atlas rested near the table, watching everyone with peaceful eyes. The German shepherd had no idea how many years of memories he had helped bring back. He only knew that this place felt meaningful. Sarah looked at Atlas and smiled. "Sometimes animals notice what we forget to notice," she said. Caleb thought about those words. They described Atlas perfectly. The dog had not searched for attention. He had not expected anything in return. He had simply followed a feeling that something important was waiting. Later that week, Sarah and her family decided to visit the park where Atlas first found the lunchbox. It was a quiet afternoon, and the same wooden bench stood beneath the trees. Everyone gathered there, looking at the place where an old memory had started its journey home. Caleb watched as Sarah placed the lunchbox beside her and smiled. The park looked ordinary. The path was the same. The trees moved gently in the breeze. But now the place carried a different meaning. It was no longer just a park. It was where a family's forgotten chapter began again. Caleb looked at Atlas walking through the grass nearby. The German shepherd seemed happy, moving calmly through the familiar surroundings. Caleb realized something important. Sometimes we think finding something means discovering a missing object. But sometimes, finding something means discovering a connection that was waiting all along. The lunchbox had traveled through years and miles, but its purpose was never just to be found. Its purpose was to bring people back together. As the afternoon light softened, Sarah thanked Caleb for following the mystery instead of ignoring it. Caleb smiled and looked at Atlas. He knew the real reason the story existed. A simple act of curiosity had become an act of kindness. A forgotten lunchbox had become a reminder that love, memories, and family connections can survive even the longest journeys. And once again, Atlas had shown that the smallest moments can lead to the greatest discoveries. The old park looked the same as it always had, but to Caleb Rowe, it carried a completely different feeling. The wooden bench beneath the trees was still there. The quiet path where Atlas discovered the forgotten lunchbox was still surrounded by the same peaceful afternoon light. Yet the place no longer felt like the beginning of a mystery. It felt like a reminder of everything that had been found. Caleb walked slowly beside Atlas, the German shepherd moving calmly at his side. Months earlier, Caleb had only been curious about why Atlas stopped near a forgotten object. Now he understood that the moment was never about the lunchbox itself. It was about the memories, the people, and the connection waiting behind it. Sarah and her family continued to keep the lunchbox as a symbol of their shared history. They placed it in a special place in their home, not because it was valuable, but because it reminded them of the moments they almost lost. Every time they looked at it, they remembered that ordinary days often become the memories people treasure the most. Caleb thought about how easily the story could have ended differently. Someone could have walked past the lunchbox. Someone could have ignored Atlas when he stopped. Someone could have decided it was just an old forgotten item with no meaning. But Atlas noticed. The German shepherd had followed a quiet instinct, and that small choice opened a door that had been closed for years. One afternoon, Caleb visited Sarah's family again. They gathered outside with Atlas nearby, sharing stories and looking through old photographs. There was laughter, gentle conversations, and a feeling of peace that came from being together. Caleb watched them and realized that the greatest discovery was not finding a lost possession. It was helping people remember the love connected to it. Sarah looked at Atlas and smiled. "He found something we thought was gone forever," she said. Caleb looked at the German shepherd resting peacefully beside him. "I think he found something that was never really gone," Caleb replied. The word stayed with him. Because sometimes memories do not disappear. They simply wait for the right moment to return. As the evening approached, the family placed the lunchbox beside the old photographs. It was no longer a forgotten object from the past. It had become a symbol of family, connection, and the kindness that can come from unexpected places. Caleb and Atlas started walking home as the sun lowered behind the trees. The path was quiet, but Caleb felt grateful. He had learned that every person, every animal, and every object can carry a story that deserves to be heard. Atlas walked beside him, just as he always had. The German shepherd had never searched for recognition. He had only followed his heart. And through one small discovery, he had reminded a family that some bonds are never truly lost. They are simply waiting for someone patient enough to find them. Some miracles do not arrive with noise. Some arrive quietly, with 4 paws, a forgotten lunchbox, and a moment of kindness that changes everything.